it's always slightly daunting to be asked to talk to a group of people about something that actually is going to resonate with every single one of you very, very differently. And I'm assuming you're all founders of various types of businesses. You probably represent tech and consumer products and health and I have a huge variety of things. So I've kind of opted to take an approach of being quite interactive with you, if that's okay. So really just wanted to start off with the principles that I've been fortunate enough to be able to develop over the years around storytelling and how one can leverage value out of really, really authentic, deeply felt stories. And then I'm going to put you all on the spot and ask you to do a little bit of work and to share some of your experiences. It will, by implication, be quite top line. But I think it would be really fun to understand really what all of your stories are. Mine is just, mine's irrelevant tonight. But I think, so my background is I can't reveal the conceit here, but I basically ran a company for 20 years in London called New Moon. We became famous for helping countries and cities secure the rights to...
Hi.
Come on in.
Come on in.
You missed the good bit.
This is the other a couple of synonymous or?
Yeah, well, if it is, we're in trouble.
Just unhook it.
So I ran a company for 20 years called New Moon. We became famous for helping countries and cities secure the rights to host major sports events like the Olympic Games, World Cup Soccer, FINA Swimming World Championships, IAAF World Athletics Championships. And when we first got the brief to do those sorts of jobs, I can honestly say none of us had any idea at all of what a bid film looked like or what a bid story might sound like. And we have been credited with inventing the genre, which is kind of flattering. But I think there is a benefit in coming from a base of zero when you start to do something, and that we certainly did. The company grew over 20 years. At our biggest, we were 60 people in 4 different countries. We expanded and contracted our teams in a very 21st century way, even very early in our trajectory. And I sold the business in 2017, not as a going concern, but sold the assets that we built up over the preceding 20 years. By accident, we clearly had a very good lawyer or somebody had a very bad lawyer on our very first deal. We ended up retaining the rights to every single piece of content that we created in the 21 years. So I think the rights landscape was probably different when we started out. So I found myself with a warehouse full of digital assets out near Heathrow, which is eventually how the company was sold, rather than selling it as something that was reliant on people, which I think is a difficult way to sell a business, to keep people enthusiastic and harnessed and energetic around achieving somebody else's objectives when they were previously yours is a very tough thing to do, and I wasn't really up for that. I was done. And so then I migrated to America. I live on the West Coast in Los Angeles, and I've started a tech business, so I'm a total cliche. But it's really, really good fun. So that's my background. I feel really privileged to be here and talking with all of you, and I'm actually much more interested in your stories. But what I do want to direct us to is the reason I think having this kind of discussion about storytelling is relevant is that it's very easy to forget how important it is to know your story. And I think we, in today's world, are bombarded with so many outside influences so continuously that we, and I'm going to talk about this very, very personally, we forget who we are, we forget what our story is, we forget our origin, we like to gloss over the bits we don't like so much. We like to enhance the things we do. You look at the online dating environment, we're all, pouting our lips and dressing up and making ourselves look fabulous and lighting ourselves well and then doctoring our photoshopping our images. And actually it's all very well and good. There's a place for that, and that's part of the story. That's part of developing a personal brand. It's part of what it's all about. But at the core, at the very heart of every single one of us and every single business is something that is true and that is flawed and that is beautiful in its imperfection. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that my business was successful in helping these weird disparate groups of stakeholders achieved success in selling this idea that their city was going to be the place that should host these major events. So knowing the story and being comfortable with it and then being able to tell it, I think, is pretty much at the heart of this. I am just going to start with a little film, and it's actually just a trailer, so it's not going on for very long. But I just wanted to put it out there as a kind of emotional. It's not really related to anything we're going to talk about, other than it is. It's the film that I made. God, I could talk forever. You've got to shut me up.
I think everyone's interested.
Basically, New Moon's first Olympic bid was London's bid back in 2004, 4-5. And that was when we had no idea what an Olympic bid was all about. And I was lucky enough to be credited as one of the 10 most important people bringing the games to London and all that sort of, stuff that happens when you have your 15 seconds of fame. And it was lovely. I really enjoyed it. But that was then, and 2004-5 seems a very, very long time ago. By 2012, we had by that time worked on 12 bids, 9 of which had been successful. By the end of when I sold the business in 2017, we worked on 14 bids, 10 of which had been successful. But the lovely thing about the London story was that it was bookended by working on the bid films at the beginning and then actually being able to make the official documentary, the feature-length documentary of the Olympic Games. And that was that became a real passion project for me. My business owes so much to the trust that the LOCOG, the London, actually the predecessor, London 2012, the big bid committee, had put in my team and I to create this narrative around the London Olympic Games. And when it came to the Games itself, the London Organising Committee had deliberately excluded from the contract a financial liability to produce an Olympic film. It was the first time in Olympic history that a city had not made the financial commitment. And it wasn't because they didn't want one, but because actually the whole landscape around broadcasting Olympic Games and the value in the content had shifted to such an extent that there really was no way to sell the film. So I basically got a bee in my bonnet and decided that we needed to bookend our Olympic story by making the official film. We got an amazing director attached. I managed to raise money through EIS. We set up the whole independent film structure, the whole 9 yards. 8 weeks before the game started, the whole deal started to unravel. We lost our director. Actually, one of our investors died. I mean, it was an absolute catastrophe. And it looked as though it was never going to happen. Anyway, we managed to plug the investment gap and get that sorted out, but we had nobody to make the film. I'd run this production company and creative agency by that time, 16 years, I guess. And I have made films, but I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a director of films. Until then. So my debut film was making the official film of the London 2012 Olympic Games, which is something that lives forever in the Olympic Museum. I cannot tell you how terrifying that whole experience was. But it was incredible. And it did mean that London Olympic story, which is a significant piece of my business's story and my personal history, had a beautiful symmetry to it. That's a very long way to introduce a very short trailer. But this hopefully will give you an insight into all of the thinking around storytelling and the expression of story that I think was very useful to us as a company and continues to be useful to me in business. That should work. It's not going to, is it? Oh, hold on.
It's not fact.
Oh no.
So all the time it is fun.
That worked better before.
I try so hard to stay that normal teenager, goes to school, goes home. I just happen, to swim 2 to 4 hours a day.
Pretty much the biggest decision of my life was just deciding to leave my family to train for my dream.
I've been dreaming of becoming an Olympic champion since I was 10 years old.
That's it. My son, he's in the family. He's always had a walk to the line. He just doesn't give up.
The gold medal is there on the 7th of August. I just want to get it. I know that if I just go out there, do my best, and give everything that I can possibly give, then I'll be proud of myself.
What an amazing race!
That was the craziest time of my life.
That really suffered from very poor audio. But anyway. So the story really there was, it was a verite film. We had absolutely no idea what the outcome was going to be. We researched thousands of first-time athletes. There were 1,100 first-time Olympians at London. We researched every single one of them. We shortlisted 400, eventually got down to 80, and finally selected 16 to film with. This film documents their journey from 6 weeks before the Olympic Games and their journey through the Olympic Games. We had world number ones, we had unproven athletes, we just had a mix of stories from every country, every variety of countries, variety of sports. And the gods were shining. So of the 12 who were featured, 6 won gold medals and 6 didn't. 2 of those who were world number ones and were expected to win golds didn't. 2 of them who were expected to do nothing won medals. It's that whoever he, she is, thank you. And the extraordinary thing, well, the film then went on to be nominated for an Emmy. I've not made a film since. I will probably never make another one. It was the most profound experience. But if ever I needed proof that story lies at the heart of everything, the experience of making that film definitely did that. And
Caroline, we're right to just turn the volume back down so it's...
yes,
that doesn't...
I don't quite know what happened with that. It was much better before, wasn't it? I don't know what went on.
It's not an event without technical difficulties, is it?
No. You'll forgive me, won't you? That's so much better in cinema on a big screen with Dolby surround sound. Oh, you know.
It's a good reason to go watch it properly later on.
Exactly. Yeah, well, absolutely.
Where can people find that movie now if they want to go watch it?
Interestingly, it's fallen out of. It's now reverted to the IOC. So I think it is still available on Amazon, but it had a very. I mean, this is. I don't want to get into a conversation about rights, but basically, it had a limited shelf life, and it's one of the reasons that London didn't want to invest in the film, and no Olympic city will do ever again. It's got to the point where you basically can't distribute it. So my fundraising efforts, I basically phoned up every person I knew who I thought might have spare cash, and I said, this is going to be the worst investment you ever make in your life, but you are going to get your name at the end of the Olympic film. It will be in the annals of the Olympics forever, and you will see the 100 metres final or any other event you want to see from the front row. And that was how I raised the money.
That is the storytelling masterclass.
And it was structured under EIS, and I have to say, I'm really, really proud. Oh God, I just did that on a microphone. Sorry. I'm really proud. We managed to make every one of those investors whole. So once they had benefited from their EIS incentive, they were basically in a net position, which was not expected. We didn't expect to make any money at all. It's impossible to distribute. And that's why people don't make them, which I think is really, really sad, because I think there's a profound legacy in these events that isn't captured in the broadcast of the sports for the competition itself. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But in the corporate world and in the business world, we get very preoccupied with this notion of the why. And I think it's a very good preoccupation to have. Why are we doing this? What's the point? And actually, that is the genesis of story. The why is the once upon a time. And it's no accident that, our children, us as children, our children's children, will perpetually understand stories when they're young from the point of view of there being a once upon a time, a journey unfolding or an event unfolding, and a happily ever after. We go and watch romantic comedies, and that's how they're structured. There's a denouement before the final scene where something's about to go wrong, but then it all comes right. That's how stories are told. And in this age of really brief digital communication, that's, I fear, becoming lost on us individually and lost on us in business. And I think the more we can return to a place of understanding that storytelling as human beings and individuals and storytelling as businesses is one and the same, the more successful we will be in communicating our brands, but also in understanding operational implications that relate to our why. And that was something I very definitely learned from all of those experiences of working with these very weird stakeholder communities that included politicians and brand owners and public-private organizations like you never come across in that bid environment. So just as an example, I've invented a story just to go through how this the kind of thinking works, and then I'd like to open the floor to you and talk about your stories and understand your once upon a times and start to interrogate a little bit why those things are important and how you can protect them. So I love to write, and I do think the written word is very valuable, although quite honestly, pictures, diagrams, bullet points, however you think is the right way to approach this, and everybody is different. So this is the story that I've just put together for the purposes of this event. So once upon a time, in 1974, a 6-year-old girl boarded a vessel known as the Windsor Castle to sail across the raging seas to Africa. And for weeks she and her family travelled up the coast until they ended up in this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, where they were mining gold and crushing rock, smashing the earth to bits to extract these tiny little bits of gold. And that was the beginning of a journey that this little girl went on throughout her life, from this barren landscape in the middle of Africa. And as this little girl grew up, she went to a little convent school in the middle of the veldt, at a time in South Africa when things were complicated. These were the apartheid years. And she was lucky. She got the opportunity to travel. And as she grew up, she got to go and see the rest of the world and to understand the context of what was going on around her. She was educated in this African environment, but had the opportunity to see the world. And that informed this little girl's view of everything that was going to, that she could achieve. And she eventually, as she finished her education and became a sort of grown-up, migrated to London, the city that is paved with gold, from a city where actually, genuinely, the concrete that is used, or the asphalt that is used to make the road, does contain gold, because the gold in those days wasn't extracted fully from the rock. But the metaphor of going to that city of gold wasn't lost on her. She had this context of the world of bringing the best people together and the people she thought made the greatest team together, and created this amazing community of people who achieved incredible things. And this team of people became world-renowned. They went everywhere to impart their knowledge and their magic and their mystery and sell their potions and all those sorts of things. So the promise was, that does smell. You're absolutely right. Who was that mentioned it earlier? It's not blasted, but it's very nice.
It's just a minute died.
But as the woman got older and the world changed, and as things do, a team of people gets tired and everything was different, they sort of put their tools down and took stock and thought about what happened next. Because really, all of those things, all of that magic potion that they'd been selling was no longer particularly exciting to anybody. Everything had passed it by, the denouement. And the world was now all about millions of bytes of data and machines doing things that humans used to do. And it created a real tension and a moment at which there needed to be a change. So she looked at all of the assets that she had and thought about all of the things that could be done, and basically chipped away at this impenetrable mountain of stuff in order to find those little bits of gold that lie hidden in the rock. And that was her happily ever after, was finding a way of extracting that gold and bringing that gold to people in a completely new and different way, that they could appreciate it and that could help them to have something of beauty. The end. Or not. So, that's my story. And I think it's kind of an interest. I would not sit in a pub and tell someone my life story like that. Or maybe I would after several glasses of wine. But going through the exercise of thinking of a story as a fantasy film or a science fiction book or whatever genre you want to apply to it is a really, really useful discipline. And the reason for that, I believe, is first of all, it completely transcends language, although I'm a word person. It means that that story becomes myth. But the integrity in that myth is so strong that you feel it rather than think it. And it's something we use with bid cities again and again and again. Often non-first language English speakers, or always with the exception of London. Is that right? I think so. So all second language English speakers or third language English speakers, a very, very mixed group of people who had priorities around operations and politics and business and sponsorship and infrastructure and all those sorts of things. But the one thing every single one of us understands is how a story makes us feel. And if you can translate story into an emotional response, then I think you're really onto something. It's where the great advertising campaigns come from, it's where great marketing lives. It's all about the thing that sits here. So, I think this is a good moment to go to your story. I'm going to invite whoever would be brave enough to do a once upon a time. Tell me the genesis of your story or your business's story. And as founders, I would assume that the two things are quite connected.
Ladies first.
Well, I would love to start, but I think it won't be fair if I hand over to the founder of the business.
Okay, do I need to stand?
I think you should.
Shouldn't have asked that.
Well, my business is very young, so it's still in a preceding fund. So I start my idea looking to the actually in Africa. Since I was very young, I used to I travel a lot for my previous job. I was working as an oil and gas as a project manager, and I remember one day I was in Africa, and one of the guys in Tanzania, I went to do my free time weekend walking, and I see a guys on the beach. It was actually very neat guys having like a tent on the beach, and I was walking, and the guys was there. Said, he just said, "What are you doing here?" And the guy said, "Well, I'm living here." And I remember still I said, "You don't have." I told him, "You don't have nothing." And the guy looked at me really shocked about when I said, "You don't have nothing." And the guy said, "Do you really think so?" And I told him, "Well, you don't have anything." He said, "You see?" And I said, "You think I don't have anything, but I actually have everything." And then he said, "Stay here with me." And I remember that he started to go on the seaside. He started to fish, and actually he pick up fresh fish from the seaside. And they said, "Let's go there. You see, I have a fresh fish. Do you have fresh fish tonight?" I said, "Well, no." And I think that kind of episode, the guy actually then, when we started to talk about, he actually was a banker. He was actually working in New York, and then he decided for his personal life, he's actually got divorced, and he was very rich. He was one of the managing director of one major bank in New York. And the guy said, I left everything. I left my family, my kids, because I realized that actually my kids didn't care about me. They only care about my money. When I remained without a job during the credit crisis in 2008, he said, my family actually had come back home, and the only things my family was worried about was actually worried about me not having anything. Oh, what am I going to do with my car? What am I doing? Definitely say nobody actually asking me how I was feeling. So I just left everything and went to Tanzania. I said, I'm living here, I have the sun, I have my drink, I have my fruit and everything, and like that. And then he said, hey, you know, here in this place, many people need money, but they don't know how to access money. So all these kind of things, then I started working on oil and gas, and I did different degrees in university, and all this kind of stuff with my MBA, you know, going through the process of everybody goes through, and you know, that's the kind of normal Western life that you need to go through the kind of process. And then when new technology come up and all this kind of stuff, I started to think about, you know, I still have in this mind my project in Africa and in Tanzania, and how can I do something to change people's life. So what I come up with about a year now, 3 years ago, I started to study blockchain. I don't know how much you guys know about distributed ledger, you know, the back end of blockchain technology. I have a background in engineering and also in finance, so I started to study that one, and a year ago I wrote a white paper all myself. I'm lucky to have technology and financial background, and I come out this kind of idea of my ecosystem, and the ecosystem is as you can find my website online, a DCI ecosystem, and is based particularly on creating an environment where I give the opportunity to investors all over the world to be able to create their account and manage their own money. Either way, you can invest in traditional asset or digital asset, but for people actually looking for investment, especially from emerging markets, you will be able to actually create your account and create your idea into the account and put it into the ecosystem, and people all over the world, investors from the world, will be able to actually see your idea and be able to invest in your idea. One of the things I actually reinforced my idea was actually about 7 months ago, when there was a very nice tweet of one guy in Syria. This guy have a tradition of 1,500 years family business, and they create pottery in Syria, one of the oldest in the world. And actually, when I saw that, and I said, oh, this is really enforced my idea to say, this is what my ecosystem will really change the world for and the life of these people. This guy was to say, I would love to have investment to get my business push it forward, but I said, I don't have anything. Syria doesn't have money. All the people here, they're not even bank. I don't even know where to get money. I said, this is actually will be a changing world through which people can really get money, and you can change people's life and availability to people in any kind of the world, in South Africa, South America, Asia. They have a very constructive idea to change something. You will be able to, with your mobile phone, you're going to have my application, submit your idea. They're going to have people in my team on a financial analyst provide everything for you, put it on the blockchain, and tokenize your idea. And this kind of new blockchain with the security token is amazing. I think is an amazing way that you can actually tokenize everything. And the tokenize is like, if you guys are not familiar with tokenization processes, like crowdfunding, but the crowdfunding is localized. Tokenize is actually globalized. You can actually invest £500. You say, actually, I want to buy £500 on this guy in Syria and invest my $500 in his business. So that's kind of things that's really come up.
So how do we turn that into a once upon a time? It sounds to me like there's something like, and I'm jumping a whole load of steps here, but is it something like, once upon a time, I met a man on the beach in Tanzania who understood how he could access things of value without owning them himself. Is that the right sort of...
Yes. Yeah.
So to begin to think about the once upon a time story that way, the way the story unfolded, I think, you know, that's something one develops, and it can be pages, it can be pictures, it can be crazy, but there's something really nice in that. So and I think, you know, we're all founders, we're all starting something. We're not people who are working for Kraft or Unilever or what have you. We have the amazing privilege to be very personal about how we tell our business story. And that resonates with people. I mean, when you're out in market, they want to, you know, people want to know about the founders. They want to know who they are because it gives them an insight into what the business is. I love that there's such a sense of humanity at the origin of your story. And I wonder, if there's a way of sort of enhancing that, coming up with a little paragraph, which is something like, and I'm not getting it right, I'm getting a snapshot, but once upon a time, I met this man on the beach in Tanzania. He helped me to understand how to access things without owning them, without being weighed down by the things that we think we need. He helped me to understand how to exchange and trade the things that have real value. And I was able to see that from my technological point of view. And that's the end of the Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, that was really good.
So,
Thank you.
it's a bit like charades. The story unfolding is, I think, where business people feel most comfortable, because we all do it. We all immediately default into that space of this is what we do, this is how it works, this is our operational process. That we feel comfortable in that space because we don't have to justify it. It's just how the business runs. That's what's unfolding. But the once upon a time is the thing that is there forever. That's not going away. And yeah, that's the bit. If we used to do these workshops with cities and countries over 2 days. Typically, the first day would be entirely devoted to the once upon a time. People could not, in a room where you need consensus, people couldn't arrive at consensus as to where this all started. And that, when we put it into business terms, comes back to people never quite understanding their why. So if one's thinking like a brand person or a marketeer, that's where your why is. Your why is in the once upon a time. That's what matters. What other businesses are you all in? You're in fintech.
I'm in finance, which means it's not anything as romantic as what not.
Everything's romantic. Money's romantic.
No, trust me, my story is based out of Boston, so nothing romantic about that.
Boston's a very romantic city, especially when it's just snowed.
All right, let me prove you wrong.
Yeah, no. Bring it on.
So, once upon a time,
in Boston.
So I was based in New York, and my partners were based in London, and we built a product that won lots of awards. And then, for one of the award ceremonies, I was here in London, in Canary Wharf, and I met with the folks who then went on to become my co-founders. And like, you know what? We won, 7 awards on this product already. For the bank, what should we be doing for ourselves? And then we had a client meeting in Boston and another one in New York. And it just seemed that everyone was saying that, you know what, you guys are great, but you will be even greater if you were independent. So then we were like, you know what, okay, let's give it a try. So it was complete foolishness, as I later found out, that we just quit our jobs and we said that, okay, looks like the clients want something that's independent, so let's start this independent business. So we pulled in a bunch of money, and I was the sole developer on the product, and then I started developing the product, and then I hired. But then the first demo ever that we had, so I wanted to save money, so it was in Boston. So I, instead of flying in or renting a hotel, I borrowed a car from Enterprise, and then I drove down to Boston to a friend's place, and then so at that time I was just building out the product. So then we almost finished the product, worked till 7 a.m. The demo was at 9 a.m. and coded through the night, but then didn't really have the time to see if the damn thing even compiles. And I was like, you know what, if I don't leave right now, I would never really make it for it. So send the code, committed it, didn't really have the time to see if it compiles, got in the car, like haven't had even a wink of sleep, and then drive down to this client's place. So then I met my partners there, and we are talking up to this company about what we are building and how it is going and what it is. And then I slowly opened my tiny 13-inch MacBook, opened it, and I had my own pocket projector. And I just started typing in, and I went to the URL, and lo and behold, it actually loaded up. So I was like, all right, this is fantastic. And that's when I turned the switch on the micro projector, projected it on the wall, and I was like, yeah, by the way, this is our product. And this was the first unveiling of the product. They really liked it. We came back to New York, and the funny thing is, 2 years later, that company that we demoed our product to ended up buying our company.
It's brilliant.
And that ended up being quite a good story.
It's a great story.
Sounds romantic.
Yeah.
It's romantic.
So since then, so it's now been a year. So I'm with the firm, and it's been fantastic. So we were cash flow positive in the first year itself, and since this company acquired us, we've doubled our number of clients and are on a very strong trajectory.
So it's love at first sight, is what you're trying to say.
Totally.
Very romantic.
I'm going to get into the romance in a minute, because I think you've gone straight into how the story unfolded. I think there was something beforehand that you haven't told us, and that's where I think we've got to look quite deep. It's so easy to that middle bit, the middle bit of the story is really easy because we live it. But I also want to ask you a question about your happily ever after.
Yeah.
Because did you know when you were in that company on that day that you were looking for a buyer down the road?
Absolutely had no idea whatsoever. We were absolutely foolish and foolhardy, which is kind of shown by the price list that we had up front. So we said we are going to charge 1 million yen, because we had no idea how to price this thing. We had something out there, but then slowly, as we gathered a number of clients, we got there. But the romantic part of the story is so right after that demo, we had another demo to another client, and then in between there was an hour. So I went up to Prudential Center, and there was a Tesla showroom there, and they had a Model X on display. So I said that, okay, before we go on to this one, I'll just go in there, and I did a test drive, and I just loved the car. and I asked my co-founder to take a photo of me there, and I told him that, you know what, when we sell this company, I'm going to buy this car. And the day we sold the company, I went to the Tesla showroom in Canary Wharf, and I bought the car, and my car's name is my company's name, which is Best X.
I love that.
That's good.
And actually, what is so nice about that actually completely tells us your happily ever after story.
Yes.
So your objective, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm making lots of guesses here today, I'm rolling a dice.
My objective was to get a car whose doors open like this.
That's a hell of a reason to start a fintech business.
Doors of a billionaire.
But it is interesting because there's something in that happily ever after doesn't need to be I want $1 billion in the bank or I want to change the world. I mean, those are big, lofty things.
So what's happily ever after?
It can be whatever you want it to be. So if, whatever you want your business to do and to be for you as a founder, it can be, my happily ever after is that I don't ever need to go into an office again. My happily ever after might be, I get to drive whatever I want to drive. I get to walk into a Tesla showroom and walk out with the car with the doors that does that. That could very easily be your happily ever after. The happily ever after changes. And I think, and it becomes the once upon a time. And I think that was kind of the point I'm trying to, I don't think, I know. It's the point I was trying to make in my story. my happily ever after in the 21 years of running New Moon for that period was a very different happily ever after to what I now think it probably ought to have been, and what my next business's happily ever after would be. And there are practical things there. I mean, I never had an exit strategy. I ran a very successful business. I had a fantastically comfortable life. I sold it for an okay amount of money. I didn't get particularly rich. But I never, ever, at any point in running that business, had any idea of what happily ever after looked like for me. No idea. Interestingly, it's the way the world changed and the way there was a big shift from people to technology that actually has either extended that story or becomes the beginning of the next one, which is now, I mean, now being in a tech business. It's the complete antithesis of what I started the other business, my previous business, to do. But those things are evolving. So the fact that you may have started that business knowing that your happily ever after was to drive the Tesla with the fantastic doors, by the time you were into the sales process, that was probably a very different happily ever after.
Absolutely. The happily ever after in this case was actually the self-validation. So it's like just the feeling of not knowing how to swim, jumping into the 6 feet, and actually knowing that, you know what, you can swim. So in this case, so working in a large organization, doing one thing, so in this case it's just about writing code, and then how it gets deployed, how it gets secured, how it gets authenticated. Everything else is like a problem for someone else, how it gets sold. So now just having to work through every single aspect of this is just like very, very enlightening. And, and along with that, earning the trust of your clients.
So important.
Of your employees and of everyone around you who, like, without whom you cannot do anything, right? So there cannot be the age of happy unless you have that. And being able to earn that and knowing that whoever you ask for to like join you in that journey, jump in your bandwagon, and then you are on to bigger and greater things. It's just absolutely fantastic and such a validation that just propels you to do more.
Yeah, I think you make two very, very important points there, and this is something I actually, it's a question to all of you. How important do you think it is that you have complete trust and transparency with your customers or investors or clients? Very.
Are you talking about Brexit or?
God, I really hoped we weren't going to have to do Brexit. It's kind of impossible. Because I think that actually is one of the areas where story plays one of the most important roles. If you're absolutely authentic about your story and you feel it and you live it and you own up to it, you'll never have a problem with trust with your colleagues, with your employees, with your clients, with anybody. Because if you are absolutely, totally 100% steeped in that understanding of where you come from, what you're doing and where you want to go, it's bloody difficult to lie. It's just, it becomes part of your fabric, and people trust you because they know that you're not pulling the wool over their eyes. If your story changes, or there's a kind of looseness to the understanding of what your story is, without even realizing it, you're creating an environment of distrust. And I do think things happen so fast now, decisions are made so quickly, there's so much reaction in the environments we work in, that there has to be a level of trust to make anything successful. So I think and actually that's a fantastic happily ever after, to say, I want to be trusted and I want to be free.
Yeah. Because that was the foundation of everything that we did.
Yeah.
So me, my co-founders, our clients trusted in us.
Yeah.
We started selling our license even before I had finished building the product.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the clients just knew that we would be doing something that they could get behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what propelled us. So that's my story.
That's a great story. Yeah. They're both great stories. How are we doing on time? I don't want to eat into drinking time. My watch says it's 20 to 11. That's not correct.
Not here.
It's 5 to 8. It's definitely, yes, cheap Rolex. They actually tell terrible time. And that's a story. I think they try to imply that they keep good time.
You can always tell that you've been traveling, and so this is the time in Tanzania, right?
Yeah, somewhere else. Yeah. So I think those are really two very, very useful stories that give us the two ends of that kind of 3-act structure. One thing I will very, very quickly refer to is where this then starts to dovetail into actually, and this is a whole other conversation, this is typically day 2 of the workshop, but actually there are very, very practical operational outcomes also. So if one looks at a chart which we'll build a little bit, so we've got once upon a time, the history and the present is where that is all wrapped up, and really the operational considerations at that stage are the structure of the business and the funding. So the genesis of the story becomes very, very important in creating a wrapper around the numbers. But the numbers have to reflect the story. The two things really need to be very closely aligned. So at the first stage, in the early stages, I think that's where story becomes very important. And I never appreciated this until until too late probably. I think I've learned to love numbers. I mean, a P&L is a beautiful, creative thing. Yeah. And it's a beautiful, creative thing because there's narrative in it. When it's just numbers in an Excel spreadsheet, it's not particularly interesting. But the minute one starts to integrate those two things, I've actually worked with clients now, particularly in the sports space, with sports federations and so on, where just by distilling pieces of the narrative into their finance models, they're seeing improvements in P&L. So, I mean, it would take too long to explain. I'm very happy to talk with any of you about that at any point. But that actually is where the storytelling piece starts to become very, very measurable. Then when you get into my very kitsch Journey Unfolded, I think that looks like a Mills and Boon cover. Anyway, we're probably all too young for that. When you get into the story unfolded on the sort of narrative side, which is the top of the screen, that's all about looking at the battle plan. Who are your allies? Who are the villagers? Who are the people carrying the weapons? For the purposes of this, I've chosen a sort of fantasy fiction kind of genre. But whatever genre you decide your business is, you'd use the right terminology. Who are the heroes? Who are the villains? Who are your allies? Who's going to help you? Who's leading the charge? What are the obstacles? What terrain are you overcoming? Think about it like watching a box set of Game of Thrones. It really is getting into that space and forgetting for a minute all of the corporate considerations that the rest of the time we live within. When you look on the other side of the story, though, you've got your why, the structure, which is the what, the how, and the who, so you get into all of your resources. Who have you got and how are your resources going to be deployed to manage those heroes or to elevate the heroes and to manage the villains, to corral the allies. The location, where are you, when are you doing things, all of that relates into the narrative piece above the top. And then the communication piece, which these days is so much more fluid than it ever used to be. At one time it would have been about what's our advertising strategy, how much above the line space are we buying, how many mail shots are we sending out. Now that becomes a very operationally and narratively related piece. So it's always putting below the line the operational implications of your story, the story remaining the thing that you're true to, never making a decision without understanding what the implication is operationally on the narrative. So it bizarrely becomes and I wish I could explain it in a really succinct way, but it becomes a way of saving money as well as making money. I'm sure there's an algorithm somewhere that would be able to work out the ratios. So storytelling becomes much more than just the lovely romantic stories that we've heard. It's so much more practical for businesses than perhaps what immediately realises. And then the happily ever after is, well, that's where we all... The happily ever after is the good bit. That's the objective. And as I say, that objective will shift. There we go, we'll end on that one. And just to give you, I can actually send you, I'm happy to send you these these models if that's of any use. I'll send it to you for circulation. But basically, that's a very unromantic way of representing what could be considered quite a romantic process. I will say that in every single bid film that we made, we became famous for the films because they're the things that people see. Every single film was built on a spreadsheet. Every single character, every single cast member, every single sport that was selected, every single location that was selected, we had a matrix of all of those decisions against where we knew the votes were going to go. So we knew what IOC members' propensity was, who they were likely to vote for on what basis. If we could show that they were solving their problems, they were likely to shift their votes over towards the city that we were representing. So that's not romantic, but the output is romantic, and the genesis is romantic.
And the journey.
And the journey is just so much bloody fun.
Yeah.
Even the bad bits. The bad bits happen, but you overcome them. So I guess that's a speedy way through the sort of storytelling structure. And I'm very happy to take any questions or have a drink.
Oh, in that case then, sorry.
I've got a drink.
We have time for a few questions.
I've got a drink.
So this resonates massively. Thank you so much for the presentation. And it reminds me a lot of the Simon Sinek Start With Why type tip.
Totally.
Right, same concept. You start with the emotional first, then drive outwards towards the practical of actually how it all works, rather than starting with here's my product, here's why it works, and then they go, oh, okay. Yeah. So it completely resonates. But I guess when you're talking to people, consumers, I know you're going to caveat this by saying that everyone's a person, everyone's a consumer, regardless if you're sat in a suit in a boardroom versus if you're on the street. But if you're pitching your wares to individual people, right, and winning their hearts and minds, is there any difference, would you say, in terms of this model compared to if you are, in a B2B environment? You're sat in a large client's boardroom and you're trying to pitch your product and you're saying, here's the story of where this has come from, here's the rationale, here's all that emotional stuff. But is there a difference, would you say, between pitching to an individual versus pitching in a corporate setting?
I think the execution is different, very different. So if I've swiped right on somebody on Bumble and I'm out on a date, I'm selling myself very, very differently to if I've gone to a job interview to be CEO of an insurance company.
Right.
But it is essentially the same story. And I think that's the that becomes quite a personal thing. I do think it's true to say that whatever environment you're in, people buy people. So to be human and to expose who you are authentically as an individual and as part of a brand or a business structure, I don't think there's any substitute for that in terms of winning people over. And it comes back to that thing of trust, because if you can be completely authentic, people will trust you. And then if they say to you, does your product work? And you say yes, they're going to believe you. But if they think there's some inconsistency in your story and they say, does your product work? And you go, yes, they're not going to believe you. I don't know what business you're in, but I'm finding that in tech. I mean, this is such an admission, and actually our product does work now, but there have been times in the last sort of 6 months, I would say, where people have asked me that question. I've said, yeah, of course it does that. And then you go out of the room and go, Jamie, can we do that? Fortunately, so far so good. But it is about building trust. But also it's about, there is a tone of voice thing. I would suggest not going into an insurance boardroom to interview to be CEO of an insurance company like you would go down to a bar and
Okay, thanks. It's interesting actually because I do work in the technology space and it's so tempting to be like, okay, products, features, technical, blah, 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 and there's always that one person in the room, everyone's kind of nodding their heads and listening to what you have to say. And then someone goes, oh, but specifically this conundrum, blah, 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 and you go, oh, here's the tech discussion, just like rabbit holes right way down. But then the flip side, of course, is you go far too down the emotional side of things, and you go, what's it all about?
Yeah, you don't want to get
it's
too...
It's kind of a fine balance.
And I think this isn't marketing. This isn't stuff you're putting out in the open. I mean, if anybody that I ever worked with put out a thing saying, once upon a time we were walking along the beach and had this great idea, I'd be mortified. This is the internal work to to get the story embedded.
But your point is the thread of narrative follows this pattern rather than actually ever saying once upon a time. It's much more that
Definitely.
you start with the premise of where did the story begin,
Yeah.
how did the story develop, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Tech is very interesting because, and I mean, everybody here is a founder. To me, a founder is somebody who is motivated by solving a problem. Somebody who goes out and founds a business and is an entrepreneur. I mean, people call themselves entrepreneurs when they start teaching aerobics and becoming freelancers. That's not being an entrepreneur. If there is a problem that you have an unbelievable desire and passion to solve, then I think that's the definition. And that, I think, is very, very important to the whole storytelling piece, is focusing on solving the problem. Inevitably, you're going to get people who are going to go, yeah, I want to know how that algorithm works and what's going on in the background and who's coding what. But actually, the person who ultimately writes the check, I would say, is probably far more interested in solving a problem than knowing how the tech in the back end works.
Yeah.
By the way, I can't turn on my iPhone, and I now run a tech business. It's the most ludicrous thing in the world. And I sit in meetings listening to conversations that could be conducted in Russian, Chinese. No idea what's going on.
When you have an audience that is a mix between VC and corporate investor and also private investor, would you structure your presentation and pitch in a different way? Because VC and corporate are quite different kind of beast. They have just follow and I think the boss there say, okay, then you get the funding. Private individual more general.
Yeah.
How have you ever had this kind of mixing?
I've never pitched to a big VC. Our funding has come from, well, we were describing it before, it's now become sort of quite complicated. I've actually had a very, very comfortable way of being eased into this world. So my assumption is that when one is pitching to a big VC, there's a very formulaic way of doing it. I haven't had that experience, so I can't give you a personal insight. The level of private equity and private investors that I have presented to have been very much on the end of wanting to be involved in something that solves a problem, and they've had specialist knowledge of the area that I'm involved with. Again, that comes down to execution though, because the story is the same. That should never change. It's exactly the same.
If you have a mix of audience, I'm asking because I'm going to be in Dubai on the 21st of October, and I'm going to be one of the panel speakers on a general topic for blockchain, and then I'm going to pitch also my business. And they're going to be everybody. They're going to be VC, they're going to be private investor, they're going to be small, just private individual, etc. So it's going to be completely mixed. So I'm actually a little bit of we're going to do something very formal, very, so, you have like a Bible to follow, or I'm going to do something mixed, I don't know.
Wow, I don't know, this feels like a very loaded environment for me. Yeah, I feel really under pressure, but I would say... I could decline to answer. But no, I would say that in that kind of environment, you want to be remembered, you want to stand out, and therefore your story is the thing that is going to differentiate you. You can, anybody, I would defy anybody to sit through 20 presentations of spreadsheets with numbers and be able to differentiate one set of numbers from another unless they've had a narrative applied to those numbers. It comes back to this P&L argument. I cannot tell you how integrated P&L decisions and narrative can be. And if you allow them to be, it becomes a very, very successful partnership. And I think that's true as well for pitching in that kind of environment. Because clearly the numbers are extremely important.
Yeah.
You're not asking somebody to buy a license, you're asking somebody to invest in creating something. But linking the narrative with the P&L, I think, is probably the best way to go.
I know you said that this is quite complex, but that point about P&L versus narrative, do you mean in terms of points where you then implemented a different narrative that seems to work well, that impacts the P&L? Or do you mean actually that they are...
No, you start to make operational decisions and therefore P&L decisions based on what the narrative really is. Because my impression over 20 odd years is that it goes back to the first slide, knowing our narrative. So people get very easily, and particularly when there are boards involved and there might be a little bit of, kind of, actually I think that's our story and that's our story and I think our story's like this. Consensus on the story actually leads to consensus in decision making and budget allocation. And that's where it starts to get quite interesting. Otherwise, you're spending money on two different things. Where if you're aligned, you're spending it on one.
Because your story creates the North Star.
Yeah.